Today is the 9th of May, 2017, and this show is called Athens Speakout, number 203. Dave DeWitt is a journalist and editor of the Athens News. The respondent to his questions is Robert Whaley, retired professor of history at Ohio University. So the first question is going to be turned over to Dave DeWitt.
So I'll be asking the questions today.
Right.
And what we're going to cover is President Donald Trump's first 100 days in office. And first of all, for my first question, his 100 days ended, the first 100 days goes up into April 29th, 2017, which was a little bit over a week ago. So, Professor Whaley, how would you grade President Trump's performance in office in his first 100 days?
Well, I did not vote for Trump, and I voted for Bernie Sanders in the primary. I voted for Hillary Clinton on the 8th of November, 2016.
Okay.
And if you're going to continue on to the second question then.
So, do you have a letter grade to give him? You're a professor. You used to have to give students letter grades from A to F. Do you have any specific grade that you would give President Trump?
I would say at most D, and personally F.
Okay.
But I don't know how that will fly.
Okay. Fair enough. Well, it's only the first 100 days. So
And you can't say that publicly because Trump has got the votes. And I think that Hillary and Sanders have to talk in modest language because they both lost.
Yeah.
So as a politician, no politician can say that. But of course, a professor can say anything he wants to say.
Right.
And a journalist like you has to be a little more cautious.
Well, as a journalist, I'm only after the truth.
Okay, good.
All right, so for my second question then, as a historian and a professor of history, do you have any historical comparisons regarding President Trump's performance and how it stands up to past presidents?
Yes. Trump could become the worst president in history, but as of now, I would rate President George W. Bush 43, who was in office from 2000 to 2008, as the worst president so far. He invaded Afghanistan, Iraq, and subsidized a satellite army in Pakistan in 3 unwinnable wars in the Middle East. I voted for Barack Obama 2 times, 2008 and 2012, but I was disappointed in his performance. He covered up for the continued wars of George W. Bush for 8 years.
So, this is our first digression then.
Good, go ahead.
By the end of Barack Obama's term in office, the United States was pretty well removed from both of those countries. We have a couple thousand troops left in both countries. Is that not enough? Would you rather see have seen Obama withdraw entirely from both?
Wait a minute. When Trump left the office, we still had a standing army in Iraq. Iraq.
Yeah, we have
they
a
had
couple
invaded.
thousand troops.
Yeah, I think it was something like 5,000.
When Obama left office.
Yeah. And Obama actually escalated the intervention in Afghanistan.
He did.
Yeah.
Initially, but then he brought it all back down before he left office.
All right. Well, do you have any statistics on it?
Well, I could look up the troop numbers, but I know that he escalated it at one point during Barack Obama's term. We had over 80,000 troops there. But then he brought that, before he left office, he brought it all back down.
And then he started to escalate it again. Then he had a surge.
10,000 left.
Yeah, but he had a surge again. He withdrew. And
he had one big surge.
Yeah. After they saw Syria and the ISIS campaign, then he invaded again.
In Iraq, he put more people there than were.
Right.
Yeah, Afghanistan. But we didn't have any ground troops fighting wars in either country by the end of his term.
I
had
doubt that.
advisors.
I doubt that.
We had air support doing stuff
Okay.
against ISIS. So I guess my question is, that wasn't enough of a peace movement under Barack Obama for your standards? Ending those wars, you think he could have done more to end
A
those
war
quickly?
ends with a peace treaty. Now, in Korea, the Korean War ended with a ceasefire. We do not have a ceasefire in Afghanistan. They just put a big bomb on Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, Donald Trump did.
Yeah, Donald Trump did.
Yeah.
Or the
Okay.
United States government.
Yeah.
Donald Trump then. No, we're
You're talking about the mother of
let's
all
talk.
bombs?
No, let's talk about Obama. Obama covered up for the military participation of George W. Bush. Now, he gave gestures that he was going to withdraw from Iraq, and he did.
He did, yeah.
But then they had some commanders on the ground because of the Syrian civil war. They got involved with
They had
that.
advisors.
Advising
Advising the Iraqi
okay.
army, yeah.
Well, the difference between an advisor and ground troops is a military distinction that is very important to them. But to the citizen, it's a la la hooey. When the French got out of Indochina, Eisenhower put in advisors. And those advisors under Kennedy began to fire back, and the United States was in an unwinnable war, which was never
Vietnam.
declared by Congress.
Right.
And then Johnson escalates it, and then Nixon escalates it.
So you think Barack Obama should have done more to pull out of Iraq, even with the Syrian
Under the American
civil war?
Constitution, Congress should declare war. Now, when Roosevelt was president, he waited until the Japanese attacked, and then he had unanimous support. We declare war on Japan, and he got 489 votes out of 500 or something like that. There was one dissenter. It was a woman. And she knew she would not be reelected, and she resigned from the Congress. Her name was Jeanette Rankin. And she became a hero to the pacifists at some later date. Okay?
Right, I
She,
remember.
yeah, she came from Montana.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, Truman has the first undeclared war. Truman got into a
Korea.
problem, okay? Because he was president, and Dean Acheson was in confusion about what to do about Korea and what to do about China, and the United States still recognized the Chiang Kai-shek government as, quote, the legal ruler of China. And Acheson and Truman were hoping that Chiang Kai-shek could defeat Mao Zedong. Well, that was an illusion. Mao Zedong, as far as he was concerned, won the Chinese Revolution in 1949 and proclaimed the People's Republic of China. The United States government refused to recognize the People's Republic of China in 1950. And Britain and Norway and India and a lot of countries recognized the People's Republic of China as having the Security Council seat. And then that so-called China policy went on and on and on until Richard Nixon was saying the Democrats lost China,
Right.
which was a lot of propaganda.
So you're okay. Well, we'll leave it there with regard to
okay.
Syria, so we can move on to the other
Okay.
questions
Good.
reviewing Trump's 100 days.
Okay, so in summary, I would say that let me repeat what Mike said. I voted for Barack Obama, but Barack Obama covered up for George W. Bush's 8 years of war. Now, Obama, after the 8 years were up, never said, well, let's withdraw from Iraq and Afghanistan. But there was a quiet policy that he was going to withdraw, and he started to withdraw. And then when the Syrian civil war broke out and the United States started aiding Israel to intervene in Syria, he started sending more advisors there. Okay? And we have advisors supposedly in Afghanistan. But those advisors are protected by what they call them, SEALs, CIA officers, and they're protected by the United States Air Force. The United States Air Force is bombing.
Well, in Barack Obama's defense, I just want to point out, I brought up some of the numbers.
Okay, good.
That at the peak of the Iraq War, for instance, we had over 130,000 troops in Iraq.
Now, this is under which president?
That was at the end of George W. Bush's term.
All right.
And at the end of Barack Obama's term, we had less than 10,000 troops.
Okay, so he withdrew.
I think that's significant.
All right, what is the numbers?
It's over 130,000 at
down
the end
to
of Bush's
10,000.
term. Down to 10,000.
He's taken 90% of them down.
Right. I think that's a significant withdrawal. That's just my opinion.
Well, it's a withdrawal from combat activities.
And in Afghanistan, that's Iraq. And in Afghanistan, now we had a lot less troops. We had around 30,000 when Barack Obama started in 2009. He brought that up to 100,000 by 2012.
Okay.
But then by the time he left office in 2016, it was back down to under 10,000 troops.
Okay. So Barack Obama's foreign policy, we would call it vacillating, wouldn't we?
You may.
Okay, you call him a peacemaker.
I think that he fulfilled his promise to withdraw troops, over 90% of American troops from both of those mistaken wars, which he voted against and opposed from the beginning.
Okay, now who got into Libya?
Well, Libya was a big mistake of his, and I will not defend his administration's policy.
Okay, all right.
So let's talk about National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, because when it just came out this week, Yates, in her testimony to the Senate, revealed that Barack Obama advised the incoming president Donald Trump against hiring Michael Flynn.
Okay.
And Donald Trump ignored that advice. Michael Flynn was hired as National Security Advisor, and fairly shortly after the Trump administration went into effect, in February, in fact, he had to resign from his post after it was discovered that he lied about conversations he had and promises he made to Russia.
Right.
Do you have any concerns about the Trump administration's ties to Russia?
Yeah, okay, fine. And I would say the word concerns is a rather vague word. I'm only a private citizen, and I am dependent on 17 U.S. intelligence agencies to leak news to the press. And as an advocate of peace, I have had very little faith in many of the U.S. presidents since Lyndon Baines Johnson and Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon was the worst president as of his resignation in August of 1974. With Ronald Reagan and Henry Kissinger as the master of the balance of power politics, I had no concerns about the Soviet Union's ability to penetrate the American intelligence system. Jerry Ford, Nixon's successor, did no damage and was simply a transitional vice president and president from 1974 to 76. Jimmy Carter was a breath of fresh air, and he tried to make a peace between the state of Israel and the Palestinians. He failed in this endeavor because he had a superficial understanding of how the balance of power system worked on a day-to-day level. Still, nobody thought that the Soviet Union had any intelligence system that could intervene in the United States during Carter's controversial foreign policy. Carter's Secretary of State was Cyrus Vance, and Zbigniew Brzezinski was appointed as Carter's National Security Advisor, and he was an anti-communist so-called balancer against Jimmy Carter's peace policy toward Israel. Ronald Reagan defeated Jimmy Carter with Cold War propaganda, but no one believed that the Soviet intelligence could intervene in the United States between 1980 and 88. That feeling of security was continued under Ronald Reagan's successor, George H.W. Bush, who himself worked for the CIA. George H.W. Bush, 41, as president, decided to intervene in the first Iraq War, or the Gulf War, to liberate Kuwait. This short war, led by General Norman Schwarzkopf, was the first successful military operation by the United States since World War II. President George H.W. Bush kept his ambitions modest, and he did not want to invade Iraq in order to overthrow Saddam Hussein. Paradoxically, George H.W. Bush, 41, served only one term as president. It seemed as if Henry Kissinger's disarmament plans and the balancing of the Soviet power against the People's Republic of China had turned American foreign policy away from communism. Many people assumed that George H.W. Bush, 41, had ended the Cold War with Moscow in 1991. The Soviet Union collapsed and lost one half of its territory, with most of the 16 Soviet socialist republics becoming independent. Bill Clinton, as a Democrat, was elected in 1992 in a surprise win. Clinton won because of the divisions inside the Republican Party between the militarists in the Pentagon and the oil companies. The Bush family, as moderates, had enough money and financial assets that they did not need another unwinnable war in the Middle East. Bill Clinton was defeated in 2000 by Republican propaganda about his sexual problems. So the second term of Clinton's was largely a wasted opportunity. He was mainly concerned with giving new financial aid to Black Americans at home and was not inclined to start any more wars in the Middle East. Nevertheless, pressures inside his administration kept pressing him to intervene in Middle East politics. Clinton remained president until 2000, the first time Americans were totally baffled by the incompetence of the U.S. military services occurred on the 11th of September, 2001. So-called 9/11 has become a confusing cliche in world public opinion. The more ambitious George W. Bush, 43, was elected as president in November of 2000 with propaganda against Iraq's dictator, Saddam Hussein. At that time, about 20 Arabs using American civilian aircraft made raids on the Twin Towers in New York City. The Pentagon is a second target, and a small town in western Pennsylvania. Bush, 43, as an incompetent playboy, expanded wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and even in Pakistan. But there was no concern in the American intelligence bureaucracy about any Russian penetration of America's cyberspace. The new Russian Federation was in economic shambles. Barack Obama was elected in 2008 and again in 2012, and he too did not seem to be interested in Europe or the Middle East foreign policy problems. His major ambition was to provide subsidized health insurance services to the poor, mostly Black working-class folk. Barack Obama and his State Department and his intelligence services were not concerned with any renewed Russian propaganda coming to the United States through cyberspace. I think you ought to ask another question here.
Okay, I can do that.
Number 4.
Yeah, I've got it. So this relates a little bit to the Russian question that we were just discussing.
Okay.
But President Trump launched a military strike against Syria, even though he campaigned by saying he would not support any U.S. military intervention in Syria. So what? How did you take that news when you found out that he had launched those Tomahawk missiles, which apparently he had ordered after enjoying the most delicious piece of chocolate cake he had ever had at Mar-a-Lago?
Well, it made me
Florida?
suspicious of Trump, and I voted for Trump because he was better than John McCain, and I voted for Trump because I thought he was better than Mitt Romney.
Obama.
Obama, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, now we're on Syria now.
Yeah, we're here.
Okay, so Trump launched this military strike against Syria, but the United States was backing Israel before Donald Trump was ever in the president's office. The United States was involved in backing Israel with money to intervene in Syria. The United States gives weapons and aircraft to Syria. I mean, to Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's for
Israel's
many decades.
one of Israel's major enemy is Syria.
So you think that Trump's launch of the Tomahawk missiles against Syria was in part to show support for Israel?
Sure, it was.
Okay.
You've heard of Netanyahu?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because that is almost directly right out of the neoliberal foreign policy playbook.
What is a neoliberal playbook?
The neoliberal foreign policy
what is
playbook is the same foreign policy playbook that we've been seeing the United States play for the last 50 to 60 years.
Okay, right.
And it's in the Middle East, is very pro-Israeli.
Right.
And what it is essentially is, in these cases, there will be U.S. intervention, a show of force, let's say, with the Tomahawk missiles, and is generally regarded as a good thing by the military-industrial complex.
That's true.
And by the mainstream media and all the vested Washington elites.
That's right.
Tend to support and cheer on this type of thing. I myself am skeptical of it.
Okay, good.
I do not believe that following the playbook of whatever.
Whoever wrote this playbook, is there such a book?
I would say the deep state, the military-industrial complex, the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They're
Okay.
the ones with this playbook.
Okay.
They're the ones who say if anybody gets out of line that we don't like.
Well, the president
We're
of the
going to
United
follow
States, the
this
president
protocol.
of the United States is supposedly in charge of the State Department and the Department of Defense. And the CIA is a subordinate organization to the Department of Defense.
Right.
They are not in charge of foreign policy unless you have a kind of a Adolf Hitler mind in which the SS takes over and the SA takes over, and we have a paramilitary state. Do we have a paramilitary state?
That's an interesting question. You call it the military-industrial complex. I call it the deep state.
Okay.
And I would argue that it is highly influential. I think that Barack Obama resisted it to a great deal by not intervening himself in Syria with Tomahawk missile strikes, for
Well,
instance.
let's say his
Well,
intervention was low-key and indirect, and it mostly consisted of money and aviation supplies.
Soft power. So,
And they go every year to the Israeli-American pact, and Netanyahu comes to the United States and asks all of the presidential candidates to give their support to Israel, and the public opinion is the United States thinks that Israel has a right to defend itself. Well, that is a cliche. Every state has a right to defend itself.
and we know how much Netanyahu openly disliked and defied President Obama. But here we have Donald Trump. We're talking about Donald Trump in his first 100 days. And he campaigned saying a couple things.
if Obama were to strike Syria, he would need congressional approval. Donald Trump
Wait a minute,
struck
wait a minute, wait a minute,
Syria
wait a minute.
without congressional
Wait a
approval.
minute, wait a minute. You've said that a little fast. Now, say that sentence a little slower. What did Barack Obama say now?
When Barack Obama was president,
Yeah.
Donald Trump said, when the question came up of whether or not to attack Syria, he
Yeah.
said if Barack Obama were to attack Syria, he would need congressional approval to do so.
That's what.
Barack Obama sought that congressional approval, and congressional Republicans said, "No, you can't have it. You can't attack Syria."
Well, I don't remember that incident, and we
it
have
was
to-
after the crossing of the red line during the first.
Ah,
chemical
the
attack.
red line. Okay, I have heard of the red line. Who
And so
drew the red?
now-
Who drew the red line?
Well, Barack Obama said if they cross this red line.
Okay.
But he said that offhand. It wasn't a planned statement. So now that's how it happened under Obama. But under the
Okay.
Trump presidency,
Right.
allegedly the Assad regime commits another chemical attack, and I
Right.
use that word alleged advisedly because
Okay.
we have a lot less evidence than the first time, and we had no investigations. Donald Trump did not seek congressional approval as he demanded Obama did, which Obama did.
Okay.
And then
So
he
Obama
launched-
is a better president than
He
Trump.
launched
I
this
agree to
attack.
that.
Well, my question is, what about Trump's hypocrisy? He said
Oh,
that
he's
he
a
would
terrible
not-
hypocrite. No question about that.
Said that he wouldn't do these things.
He changes his mind every week.
But it seems
I don't know
to
where
me-
he stands.
I guess that's what is part of
At
our
least the
challenge
mass
here,
media
trying
said
to
there was a
suss-
red line.
Trying to suss that out.
And I think that drawing the red line by Trump was an imprudent thing to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, all right. So, you
That's
think-
the red line is sort of like the 38th parallel in Korea and the 17th parallel in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
And if you cross that, it says to the so-called enemy, if you cross that line, we will bomb you. Well, the Korean War and the Vietnam War do not set any good precedent for me as a pacifist about drawing red lines.
Right.
The red line is a military challenge to potential enemies, saying to the enemy, I dare you to cross that line.
Right. And then, you have to be willing to follow up, perhaps.
Yeah.
So that's going to bring me down to here.
Okay,
and I'm
good.
going to ask this question.
Good.
So, in light of this idea, do you think that President Trump's strike on Syria was appropriate or inappropriate
President Trump's strike on Syria
in February? Yeah.
was stupid.
Okay.
Appropriate is a kind word. It's just proof to me that Trump doesn't have a clue of the difference between Syria and Iraq and ISIS or Israel as far
I'd
as that
be
goes.
somewhat surprised if he could find it on a map,
Yeah, right.
to tell you the truth.
He's a real estate
I
man.
wish that I was joking, but I'm
A
not. you
real
know?
estate man is not competent to be president. He's going to make a deal. He's going to make a deal with Mexico. He's going to make a deal with China. He's going to make a deal with Russia.
Right.
He even had investments in Russia.
Well,
So does
according-
anybody know what he really believes or what stands or where he's going to draw the line?
I can't seem to tell from day to day what he'll actually believe on one thing or
Yeah,
another.
good. Okay.
So,
So I would say that Trump made one big mistake in his missile strike. Supposedly, the Saudis and the Kurds and the Iranians are supposed to make any follow-up to destroy ISIS with land troops. That's the problem of Trump. He's on the edge of possible going either way. Well, he's out of office now. So he got through his administration with less casualties than previous presidents.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
In that sense, he was a success.
Right.
And that's why many people voted for Donald Trump. We thought he was going to bring peace.
Well, that's how we campaign.
Yeah.
And that's how most presidents, even if they
Right.
end up bringing us into the biggest wars, they
But his
usually
second
campaign.
administration was better than his first. He began to get a little
Oh,
more.
you mean Obama?
Obama, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, Trump. We're into Trump. I keep mixing them up, don't I?
Yeah.
Okay, so Trump then made his big mistake with a missile strike. Supposedly, that's recently.
Right. I see. Okay.
And he's supporting the Saudis and the Kurds and Iranians with money. And supposedly they're going to provide the ground troops to destroy ISIS. That's a questionable foreign policy. And I go along with Andrew Bacevich. Andrew Bacevich is the real dove behind the scenes. And I had great hope that Andrew Bacevich would become important in the Democratic administration, but the Democratic administration lost. And Andrew Bacevich is now back in the cellar, unknown. Yeah. Nobody's going to talk about Andrew Bacevich anymore.
True.
Except dubs like myself.
Yeah.
Unreconstructed dubs.
May your reconstruction never come then.
Yeah, okay, good.
So next I want to talk about executive orders, but first we have to take a station break.
Okay, very good.
So I am David DeWitt, the Associate Editor of the Athens News. I'm here with Robert Whaley, Professor Emeritus at Ohio University, a history professor, distinguished history professor, and we are talking about the first 100 days of the presidency of Donald Trump. And we've covered a couple subjects so far. The next one I'd like to get into is his use of executive orders. And I'd like to preface this by noting that he harshly criticized Barack Obama for the use of executive orders, calling them imperial, quote, and king-like, quote. Do you want to make a statement about that first of all?
Yes. The word imperial in this context is rather stupid and unbelievable propaganda. The word imperial had meaning during the long wars of Lyndon Baines Johnson, Richard Nixon, and George W. Bush 43. I cannot remember a single military operation launched by Barack Obama's Secretary of State or Defense. Okay. So here I'm coming back to defending Barack Obama, as you were doing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Trump has signed 90 executive orders, executive actions in his first 100 days, including 43 executive orders. And there's other executive actions that he's taken that are rules changes and things such as that. So that is the most executive orders of any president in 70 years, since World War II. What do you make of that, of this unprecedented level of using executive actions and executive orders to...
Well, if you believe in democracy, the voters choose the Senate and the House of Representatives, and the President of the United States, beginning with George Washington, going down to Herbert Hoover, thought the duty of the president is to enforce the laws of Congress. Now, Franklin Roosevelt increased the executive powers of the president beyond any other president before his time. Now, Woodrow Wilson did a little bit that in First World War, because once the United States declares war, the president has new executive powers on an emergency military basis because he becomes the commander-in-chief. And the commander-in-chief now becomes active. In normal times, in peace times, the commander-in-chief is just a kind of a label of the president that's only going to be used in times of war, okay? So, yes, Roosevelt, in a way, does increase the power of the imperial president, but he never said he was imperialist.
No, and
It was all underground. He was fighting against Nazi imperialism and fascist imperialism, but indirectly, the military-industrial complex grew under Roosevelt through money because he had to subsidize the Russians with Lend-Lease, the British with Lend-Lease, the Nationalist Chinas with Lend-Lease, and they all became somewhat subordinate to the number one victor in World War II, Franklin Roosevelt.
And I think it's important to note that there's an obvious reason why Roosevelt used so many executive orders, and that's because he was in the middle of World War II.
Yeah.
And this is not unusual. Abraham Lincoln suspended
Sure he did.
habeas corpus
Sure he did.
during the
Absol-
Civil War.
Right.
During World War I,
Right.
they created the Espionage Act, which was used to
Right.
imprison dissidents and
That's right.
leftists and communists.
That's right.
And anybody.
And
who
Roosevelt's big
against the war.
sin was arresting the Japanese on the basis of race.
Yeah.
And he went along with that.
Right. But that's not to say that internment camps were not used before. They were used in World War I.
Yeah, that's right.
The internment camps
Right.
were used in the Civil War as well.
Right.
But what we have here is President Trump in peacetime
That's right.
using executive orders and
Right.
trying to govern by executive order as though he were in wartime.
That's bad, bad, bad news.
I agree. That is very bad news. Yes. I agree.
Okay.
So regarding his executive orders, one of the most significant ones, one of the most newsworthy ones, was his travel restrictions on people from specific majority Muslim countries.
Okay.
So what are your thoughts on that order
Okay.
specifically?
Regarding, all right, let's see. Regarding the executive orders, the ones that made
The one that made the
most news was the travel restrictions on people from specific Muslim countries. And my answer is, you have answered your own question. The federal courts have stayed these executive actions regarding immigration from Muslim countries. The United States Constitution says nothing about immigration. The United States Constitution gives freedom of religion to all individuals, whether they are Catholics or Protestant or Jew. The laws of Congress have been modified on immigration quotas up and down many times since the 1860s. The Chinese and the Japanese were totally banned in the 1860s. Nevertheless, there was substantial smuggling on a group of Chinese in San Francisco and New York. The Chinese laundrymen who settled in San Francisco and New York could import dozens of children to their sweatshops. The extended family smuggled Chinese-born children into California and New York because there were no inspectors. The United States, from 1860 to 1920, assumed that it was an underpopulated nation. Therefore, they welcomed immigration from Europe to provide industrial workforce. From 1918 to 1924, there was a great fear in the United States about refugees coming from destroyed countries in Europe. There was an anti-communist bias against immigrants coming from Germany, Austria, Poland, the rest of the East European countries, especially from the new Soviet Union. These fears were based on an ideological grounds. Some of these fears were based on anti-Semitism, which had been inherited by Catholics and Protestants since 325 AD. A few rich Jews, mostly came from Germany, which arrived between 1789 and World War I. They stayed mostly in New York City and provided intellectual capital to the underdeveloped America. Jews became quickly the most successful capitalists of any European immigration group. Jews since the Age of Reason in 1670s through the Age of Enlightenment, 1637 to 1795, educated their sons to a higher degree than the self-satisfied Catholic and Protestant governments of Europe. They assumed that they would always be dominant. This attitude dramatically changed in 1924 new immigration law called the Johnson Act. The law was based on nationality. Democrats and Republicans were united. They all agreed to set quotas based on the present census statistics. England obtained the #1 quota, since most of the American population had previously come from England. Germany was #2, whether they were Catholic or Protestant. Ireland was #3, whether they were Catholic or Protestant. As one looks down at the map and we go east and south toward the war zones, the national quotas become less and less. Bulgaria and Albania were probably at the end of the line. From 1929 to 1939, the United States attracted few immigrants because of the lingering depression. Germany and Britain returned to full employment faster than the United States because of the coming of World War II. The United States did not permit any immigration, communists, Nazis, Italian fascists, or Japanese, to come to the United States during World War II as a basis of politics and immigration policy. In 1960, when the United States invaded the Bay of Pigs in Cuba, the United States changed its immigration policies. Rich Cubans who had trouble with Fidel Castro were welcome to come to Florida. Communist Cubans, like communist Russians, Chinese, and even Yugoslavs, were not allowed to immigrate to the United States. After the American invasion of the Indochina Wars ended in 1973-75, the United States welcomed some Vietnamese refugees to come to America. These were Vietnamese from South Vietnam who had collaborated with the American Army during the long wars of the United States in Indochina since 1954. Federal courts blocked Trump's decrees because only Congress can modify the immigration quotas. I do not think that Trump understands or respects congressional laws or the constitutional power of judicial review. The question of Muslim visas will lead to a great debate in the next Congress. Oil companies and the universities and the American military need temporary visas for those Muslims who are collaborating with the United States foreign policy objectives. Steve Kushner, the son-in-law of Donald Trump, is trying to sell investment visas to potential palatial homes to the Chinese on the Jersey Shore. I feel confident that the courts and the State Department will declare investment visas as another Trump non-starter. As of now, Immigration and Nationalization Service do not have enough inspectors to police the number of would-be terrorists who can fly to the United States and walk into the open fields. Immigration from Mexico, Central America, the Middle East present the United States with an entirely different complex problems. The job of the president is to enforce the laws of Congress. Since 1965, the Republicans in Congress have become overpaid sinecures. Since 1972, the defeat of Senator George McGovern, South Dakota, Democrat, presidents of the Democratic Party have become paralyzed. Psychological identity questions on the basis of ethnic conflict between Jews, Muslims, and Latinos and Anglos have been weakening Franklin D. Roosevelt's great coalition. I think I've said enough on that question. Do you want to go
So,
to another one?
in this debate over his executive order regarding the travel ban, President Trump challenged the concept of judicial review. His administration claimed that some of his orders are unreviewable.
Well, that's just a statement that he made. Doesn't have any meaning in law.
And
He's not the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is going to decide this.
I'm not sure that he has any. He's also threatened to get rid of the 9th District Court.
Well, that's even crazier. What is he going to do? Arrest him with his paramilitary troops?
I'm not sure that he understands this concept of.
No, he does not understand that. Absolutely. He doesn't have a law degree. He's a real estate dealer. In fact, he's used the law in order to cheat his workers who build his houses.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
He knows enough about the law to manipulate it for the Trump Towers and the Trump profits. He's interested in profits. He's a joke.
And this is kind of what I'm driving at with these questions. He's called the American constitutionalism, he's called it an archaic system and a bad thing for the country. And it seems to me that a president who is willing to question the concept of judicial review, threaten to remove district courts, call the constitutional system an archaic system and bad for the country, it seems like we're inevitably heading toward a constitutional crisis, because
we're going to have a constitutional crisis.
It's
That's
one
true.
step from that to him openly disobeying a
That's
court
right. That's
order.
right. We all
And that
have.
creates a constitutional crisis.
Unfortunately, it will. Now, what happens in the 2018 elections? Do the Democrats make a recovery on the governors and the senators? Will the Republicans stop just voting a blank check to whatever Trump says?
I don't know.
Nobody knows.
I don't know.
Right now, they're zombies.
We're
Yeah, the Constitution has been weakened a long time.
where we are.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, the Constitution has been weakened for a long time. Well, starting a little bit with Roosevelt, but more so with Truman and Eisenhower, and then big time with Johnson and so forth.
I have a question for you about that historically, about this usurpation of war powers,
Right.
specifically by the executive branch, that I think started with Truman and with Eisenhower, and I think there's an argument that it started specifically because of the development of the atomic bomb and
That's
the
right.
hydrogen bomb.
That's right.
And what this did was it created a certain amount of fear that
Right?
if the United States were attacked once the USSR got the bomb, Congress may not be able to act quick enough to retaliate,
Right.
and so that transferred. So who has power over this weapon? Who
Right.
can retaliate?
Yeah.
And it was decided that the president would have that power, and I think that is really the beginning of the erosion of these war powers. But it got so much more than the bomb, like the Korea and Vietnam,
Right.
and it led to all these wars where the bomb wasn't a factor.
Well,
But
the bomb is still a factor.
Well, it was, but you had the executive basically
Executive.
pursuing wars
That's right.
without congressional approval.
Yeah, but yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think we've said that, but many times. But my answer came from Franklin Roosevelt. The only fear we have to fear is fear itself. And it was Kennedy, the last Kennedy, not John Kennedy, not
Obama.
Robert Kennedy. Who was the last Kennedy?
Teddy?
Teddy Kennedy repeated all during his last days in Congress, "You have nothing to fear but fear itself." And I thought the last Kennedy was the best of the Kennedys because he had given up on the Cold War, given up on the atomic race, and he was looking forward to peace. So that's the slogan for the future.
Yeah.
Donald
But
Trump
fear-
was elected on fear.
We will always have those forces trying to
That is true.
stoke people's fears and use it and politicize it.
That's right.
Keep them afraid.
Right.
Perpetual war for perpetual peace. And
I don't know if we always have it,
memorable
but
phrase. I think it's almost human nature, politically, to use
all right,
fear to try
are
to
you
drive
saying that
people.
democracy is inevitably going to collapse?
Oh, I don't know about that. I think that there will always be forces that are attempting
There
to
are always
usurp power through the use of fear.
That's true. That is true. They were called
I think
demagogues.
they must be fought against. And
Joe McCarthy was a demagogue, and I'm afraid that Donald Trump is a demagogue.
a healthy democracy eventually overcomes those people.
And it should have been healthier than it now is.
I agree.
And unfortunately, Truman weakened a little bit, Eisenhower a little bit, and then it began to escalate under Johnson and Nixon and Ronald Reagan. And it's been a very slow recovery with Clinton and Obama.
Well, yeah, and every time that we take a step forward,
Take another step back.
yeah.
That's true.
So,
So the future is questionable. We're in decay as a society.
so I guess I want. That's where I'd rather. The next thing that we'd like to get into, which we'll probably have to save for the next episode, is the healthcare debate and what the Republicans recently did with the.
Well, I think you have something more here to say about inevitability. Donald Trump challenged the concept of judicial review and is claiming that some of his orders are unreviewable. I guess we've handled that question.
Yeah.
And I say this is number one. Okay, fine. I guess we've said all of it. 9th District, I guess we've covered that. I'm just looking at my notes, whether we've said that all orally.
Yeah.
And I've talked about the brown shirts and the SS and so forth and so on. And I think we've...
the
there's-
libel laws.
Here's something new.
Rinse Priebus.
Only Congress can challenge the libel laws. Does Rince Priebus have any law degree? That's my question.
Rince
Yeah.
Priebus is
Who
Donald
is-
Trump's chief of staff. He was the former chairman of the Republican National Committee. And I know he's from Wisconsin. I'm not sure what his background is with regard to whether or not he's a lawyer. I can look that up very quickly. But he has basically threatened
Yeah.
to have the libel laws changed so that the Trump administration can go after fake news.
Does he have a law degree, or is he just a political propagandist?
He's definitely a political animal. I mean, that's where he spent most of his
Yeah.
career, either as the chairman of the RNC or chairman of the Wisconsin Republican Party before that, and now the Donald Trump's chief of staff. It seems like, yes, he does have a law degree. He was a lawyer. It looks like he got his law degree from the University of Miami School of Law.
Is that in Florida?
Yes, the one in Florida.
I'm afraid that's a second or third rate law school.
And he was.
It doesn't match Harvard, Yale, or Michigan, or Stanford.
Mostly as a political guy. Yeah, it's not like he's not like he was,
Yeah.
editor of the Harvard Law Review. Or
Yeah,
anything
yeah,
like Barack Obama, for
Yeah.
instance.
It's a night school law degree.
But I find the Trump administration's habit toward authoritarianism in this degree
Terrible.
concerning.
Absolutely.
Especially as a journalist, because it seems like they don't have much respect for the First Amendment.
Absolutely
or freedom
none.
of speech or freedom of press.
Absolutely none.
And
Absolutely.
they're willing to try any excuse they can to put the muzzle on anybody who detracts from them.
Right.
And that's worrisome to me, because in one event, let's say a Reichstag fire,
Right.
then they will have an excuse to bring the hammer down.
Right.
And our history shows that, with the Espionage Act that we talked about earlier and whatnot, wartime things, that is often used as an excuse to do so. I'm not sure that the Trump administration has the political clout to do that, though.
It also puts me in mind of the John Adams Alien and Sedition Act.
Oh, we
So
only
we've
have
got- we've
only
got
have 2 minutes.
minutes left here.
Okay, so I think we'll stop here and we'll begin next time with question 8.
Okay.
Is that an agreement with you?
I think that sounds good.
Okay, so
to sum up,
Okay.
on the issues that we've covered, from Syria to
Right.
executive orders to understanding of judicial review, do you have any summary thoughts of the Trump administration's first 100 days?
I would summarize it as a demagogue who could, in the good sense of the word, become the second P.T. Barnum. The great danger is that the Democrats, in their divisions, underestimate his cleverness, because the Democrats are badly divided on ethnic and religious and psychological issues, and the Republican Party is very united. 3/4 of all of the political posts in the United States are held by authoritarian Republicans. And this came out of the Goldwater campaign. The Republicans had a slogan: "You will not criticize your fellow Republican." So the Republican Party has become a one-party conservative party where liberals are not allowed to stay, and all of the liberal Republicans have either resigned and become Democrats or retired or dropped out of politics. So the Republican Party is almost a monolithic party now, and it's been growing since the Goldwater election. Now, there may be some hope in the future, and we'll discuss that next time.
We will pick that up next time. Thank you for answering my questions and being patient with me, Professor. As you always say,
Okay.
debate is the oxygen of democracy.
And we got to keep the
We'll
debate
keep
going.
it going next time. Thank you.
All righty. Good.